Good morning. I want to talk today about the astrology of fall 2023 and how it might affect Vladimir Putin. So let's see if I can share my screen here. And I just need to make a few adjustments before I get started so that I can see what's going on. Okay, and here we are, fall 2023 for Vladimir Putin. Now, this is a chart that most people use for Putin. Uh, However, there is some dispute over his birth time and place, but as I said, this is the chart that most people use, and the birth time and place have been confirmed by Putin's webmaster. And I've been using this chart for a few years, and it does work fairly well, very well, in fact. And I'm going to be looking at those transits which predominate throughout fall 2023 with respect to how they apply to Putin's chart. This is just a bi-wheel with Putin in the inner circle and the transits for the new moon on September 14th on the outside. And I've pretty much just circled conjunctions, squares, and oppositions, the tenth stuff. But if you look over here at this grid, you can see the tense aspects in red. They tend to outnumber the easy aspects that are in blue. Okay. There are also aspects in green, which denote semisextiles and inconjuncts. Those are aspects that require adjustment, promote change. I'm not really going to talk about those so much. Mainly just what's difficult and what's easy. Okay, so let's look at some transits throughout the fall for Putin. And I may flip back and forth between some of the bar graphs showing transits and Putin's birth chart. All right, I've put squares around some of those things that concern me the most. And those influences I think will be strongest this fall. Uh, the graphs here, the bars show with the 2-degree orb when certain conjunctions, squares, and oppositions will be in effect. And if an aspect becomes exact on a certain date, it shows the date inside the bar. And over here with the rectangles around them are the ones which will probably be most influential. And if you just take a quick glance at this, you might notice that the glyphs for Saturn, Uranus, and Chiron appear frequently. And that suggests that throughout this fall, there's going to be a fair amount of frustration, uh, unexpected events and change, and possibly wounding for Vladimir Putin. Okay, in effect now is Chiron in opposition to Saturn. That's getting stronger. That's going to be exact on October 16th, which is going to be right after a solar eclipse that I believe is on October 14th. That eclipse is going to magnify the influence of Chiron in opposition to Saturn. And this suggests that he will undergo some wounding as a result of his past actions, his past karma, if you will. Also, Chiron is going to be square natal Uranus on September 25th. That is shortly, just a few days after the fall equinox. And this too could represent some unexpected wounding. Okay, he's already experienced the peak of Neptune square Mars, but the influence is going to linger throughout the fall. And Mars dissolves the boundaries between things. I'm sorry, Neptune dissolves the boundaries between things. Mars is aggression. Okay. And this could result in some anger, some aggression, uh, which has no bounds, so to speak. Uh, the controls on that aggression are weakened when with Neptune making a square to Mars. Now, at various times throughout the fall and continuing throughout the fall, he will have transiting Uranus, square natal Pluto, and transiting Uranus square his midheaven. Let me go back to his birth chart for a second. And we see Pluto is right up here near the top of his chart. Pluto is the ruler of his ascendant, his rising sign, which is Scorpio. So he naturally gravitates toward power. And with Pluto and Leo, he wants to be the sole ruler, the king, the source of power. It's conjunct the south node. So uh, he wants to be sort of an old style czar, an old style Russian czar. Now, Uranus is right now in his seventh house near the cusp of his eighth house, which rules death and transformation. But Uranus is a pressure for change. It's moving retrograde now. So it's moving away from exact square with Pluto toward an exact square with his midheaven and then with the lunar nodal axis, which tends to intensify things. Okay, so there is a pressure in effect right now for a change in Putin's status. And this pressure was also strong last summer when Prigozhin uh, led his short lived insurrection against the government in Moscow. So there are going to be pressures for change that continue that would like to change Putin's status and probably get him out of power. However, remember that Putin is very well protected and he also has access to excellent medical care. So even though the pressures are there, it may not be easy to remove him from power. And let's see, we also have Saturn squaring his Mars. That reached a peak on September 8th, continues for a while, but then it comes back into force, becomes exact again on December 28th. This is going to represent ongoing frustration that Putin is likely experiencing, and maybe some restrictions on his health as well. Okay, now in October, he will have transiting Jupiter in opposition to his Venus. That becomes exact on the 25th. Uh, that may not be as bad as it looks. Let's go back to this chart for a second. Here we see Jupiter pretty close to exact opposition to his natal Venus. Jupiter tends to expand things, so even when it's working badly, it's often not so bad. In its worst case, it can mean too much enthusiasm, uh, too much expansion, too much spending, for example. But Jupiter is in Taurus, and Taurus is ruled by Venus, which is in Putin's first house. So that is going to lessen whatever severity this aspect might cause. And this could actually signify Putin reaching out to other countries. The seventh house here represents others in order to get more resources for those things that he wants to do. And we have just very recently seen him do that uh, with North Korea. He's reached out to the leader of North Korea apparently to try and get more resources for his war in Ukraine. Okay, now as fall continues, this conjunction between transiting Uranus and natal Jupiter, that is going to get stronger and will become exact on December 18th. And Uranus represents change, Jupiter represents expansion, often associated with a person's luck. And Jupiter is in the seventh house, which has to do with others, and in this case, with other countries. So there might be some change in Putin's luck occurring in December, and his alliances with other countries might change. Okay, and as the year continues, Chiron is going to get closer and closer to an opposition to his natal sun. It doesn't become exact, but it's within this 2-degree orb for quite a while. If we go back to this transit chart, you can see that Chiron is pretty close to exact opposition to Saturn. Uh, and then it starts to make this journey from Saturn to an opposition with the Sun. It won't reach an exact opposition to a Sun, but will turn around, move direct, and eventually be in opposition to Saturn again. So there's this period in which Chiron can cause wounding. Chiron is going through a sixth house of health. So there can definitely be health concerns. This is Chiron has been affecting him for a while, affecting his sixth house for a while. So I suspect that there's some truth to all these rumors about Putin having some serious illness that might be ongoing. But like I say, he has access to the best medical care, and that can make a difference. But as Chiron makes this opposition to Saturn, moves on toward the Sun, he is probably going to experience some wounding of one sort or another. Okay, and let's see, with Uranus making squares to Pluto, his midheaven, and the nodal axis, there is going to be pressure for change. And Saturn, as it squares his moon, that's going to be causing additional frustration. And when Uranus comes into conjunction with his natal Jupiter, there may be some change in things and some change in his luck. However, he will probably have some success in getting resources that he needs from other countries. Okay, so that gives you kind of an overview of the difficulties that Putin will face this fall. A lot of them become most intense in September, and others become very intense in December. And we have some things like this one, Chiron, in opposition to Saturn, occurring near the lunar eclipse. So that is going, or the solar eclipse, so that will intensify it more. Jupiter in opposition to Venus, that becomes exact on the 25th. That's pretty close to the lunar eclipse, I think happens on October 28th. That may actually turn out to be good for him. Or on the negative side, it could represent a lot of other countries being even more opposed to Putin. We could get both of those results, some good results or some bad results. We'll have to wait and see. Okay, if we look at the easy aspects in his chart, well, there's not all that much going on. Uh, we have Saturn making a trine to his ascendant that was exact on September 4th, continues for the rest of the month. That eases some of the tensions. It creates some stability in his life and in the path that he is following that will start to become strong again in December. Uh, Jupiter trine Chiron, that can bring out some of the sweeter, more transcendent side of Chiron. That is going to be strongest on December 1st. It's in effect with a 2-degree orb throughout the second half of November and throughout December. It would be very nice if that brings some transcendent wisdom finally uh, to Putin that he might use to seek a way out of this conflict. But we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. In general, it could represent the sweeter side, the more transcendent side of Chiron, but uh, sometimes people can find a way to use something good for bad purposes. So, like I say, we'll wait and see. Also in December, transiting Uranus will get closer to a sextile with natal Uranus, and that doesn't become exact this year, but its influence will be felt throughout December. If we go back to this chart, we see transiting Uranus is in a seventh house, which represents others, close to the cusp of the eighth house of death and transformation. It's making a sextile to natal Uranus, which is in its ninth house, represents the group mind, the ideas of others. It also rules Aquarius. Let's see, which he has on the cusp of the fourth house that represents his home, and because of his position, also the homeland. At best, in December, let's see, he might start listening to what others have to tell him, and that might result in some change in his stance. Let us hope. Okay. Also worth noting here are when transiting planets make a conjunction or opposition uh, with some of his planetary midpoints, or when a midpoint between transiting planets, uh, when a natal planet is conjunct or in opposition to that midpoint. Either of those things can happen, either are important. Now, some of these midpoint conjunctions and oppositions are going to be very important. And by the way, if you look at the midpoints that I have rectangles around, a lot of them tend to involve Chiron, Uranus, and Saturn, which has to do with wounding, unexpected, and frustration. So, a lot of frustration this fall, a lot of wounding this fall, and a lot of unexpected events this fall are what I anticipate. Now, if one of these midpoint conjunctions or oppositions is near a time when things are more intense, like uh, the fall equinox, a solar eclipse, a lunar eclipse, or the winter solstice, then that makes it a little bit more powerful. And this first one, Chiron in opposition to his Sun Mercury midpoint, that is going to fall right upon the fall equinox here, September 21st. So he could experience some personal wounding or illness at this point. Best case scenario, of course, is he experiences a sudden flash of enlightenment, the transcendent aspect of Chiron. In that his case, I'm not going to hold my breath. I suspect he's going to have his shell cracked before he can transcend, and so this will probably work out in terms of wounding. Now, this one on the 14th is going to be important because that is the day of the solar eclipse, and he will have transiting Chiron in opposition to his Sun Neptune midpoint. Again, best case scenario is a flash of enlightenment. Worst case scenario, assassination. Uh, Sun represents himself. Neptune, things that have ill-defined boundaries. It can also be associated with slander, hidden enemies, even assassination. And Chiron, of course, is wounding. He has some other contacts with midpoints around this time. On the 7th, Saturn's in opposition to his Sun Uranus midpoint. frustration due to a sudden turn of events. On the 21st, Uranus is in opposition to his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So aggression, restriction, sudden change, uh, that rarely works out well. We'll have to keep an eye to see what happens with Putin in October, but these midpoints, they are often turning points when actions occur. In November, let's see, on the 9th, is the midpoint between transiting Uranus and transiting Neptune will be in opposition to its Mercury. That could be a sudden change in thinking, hopefully for the good. This is really interesting. He has two midpoint aspects that will be exact on December 4th. Okay, that's not close to the solstice, which is on the 21st, but the fact that two midpoints are being exact on the same day, that can be quite meaningful. Chiron will be in opposition to a Sun-Saturn midpoint, and Uranus in opposition to a Sun-Mars endpoint. So this is frustration, aggression, sudden change, wounding, and himself, the Sun. So I wouldn't be surprised for some sudden change in his person to occur on this day, for some wounding to occur, maybe some aggression, frustration. I think definitely there may be some health problem or some sort of attack on Putin on this day. Like I said, it's very difficult to get rid of him. He's well protected and has excellent medical care available. Nonetheless, these are going to be times when sudden things can happen. Okay, well, I think that is the last slide that I have here, sure enough. And so let me stop sharing. And so in a nutshell, there are going to be various times throughout this fall when Putin is likely to undergo frustration, wounding, and there will be pressures for a change in status. And it might be health problems that eventually bring about a change in status. Next year, there's going to be a lot more of this. So eventually, I think Putin will go. It's just a matter of when. Uh, but for this fall, overall, things don't look so good for him. There will be that frustration, that wounding, and pressures for change. So he could possibly become enlightened. Wouldn't that be nice? A flash of enlightenment, and suddenly we see a whole new Vladimir Putin. But uh, I don't think that's very probable given his past history. Either way, let's hope that there's a good outcome to all these things, which results in a better world for the rest of us. And let us all hope and continue to pray for an end to this senseless aggression in Ukraine. And let us keep uh, giving to help feed the refugees, feed the poor, the hungry, those in need in Ukraine and elsewhere. And let us continue to, in our prayers and meditations, to visualize light on this situation, a light that will break up the darkness and break the stalemate and lead to something better. Okay, well, that's my take on Putin for fall of 2023. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon. So long and be well.